In this video, I find it to be true that George Bush and his former administration should be prosecuted for war crimes. Take a look, see what you think.
Let's bring in now our next guest, who's the author of a really controversial book. All you have to do is read the title's name for you. You'll know why. It's called The Prosecution of George W. Bush for Murder, which contains such passages as, and I quote, "All of the young men who died horrible and violent deaths in Bush's wars had dreams. Bush saw to it that none of them would ever come true." He is, of course, renowned author Vincent Bugliosi. Vincent, thank you so much for being with us.
Happy to be on the show, Joe. I was sorry to hear we're only going to have a couple minutes. We're talking about potentially the biggest murder case in American history. I'd like to have a little more time, but you give me whatever time you want, and I'm happy.
Well, you know, Vincent, you just blew half of your time complaining about the little time that we gave you. Vincent Bugliosi, thank you so much for being with us.
I was told 10 minutes.
Well,
okay, Joe, go ahead.
Let me tell you something, brother. If you get 10 minutes, you're luckier than presidential candidates we get on this show. So why don't we just start right now?
I was told 10 minutes. Okay.
Okay, why don't we start right now? Tell me, why is George W. Bush guilty of murder?
Well, in my book, The Prosecution of George W. Bush for Murder, I present evidence which proves beyond all reasonable doubt that Bush took this nation to war in Iraq under false pretenses, on a lie, and therefore, under the law, he is guilty of murder for the deaths of over 4,000 young American soldiers who died fighting his war in Iraq. In the book, I put together a legal case against Bush that could result in his being prosecuted for first-degree murder in an American courtroom. I set forth the legal architecture for the case against Bush, the overwhelming evidence of his guilt. I hope we have a little time to talk about some of that evidence, and the jurisdiction to prosecute him. In fact, either today or tomorrow, a copy of my book is being sent out to each of the 50 attorney generals around the country with a cover letter from me asking them to read the book. If they agree that the evidence of Bush's guilt is clear and there's jurisdiction to proceed against him, I'm offering my services in any way the prosecutor sees fit, which could range all the way from being a consultant up to and including being appointed a special prosecutor. And I can tell you, Joe, I can tell you that at this stage of my career, I don't have time for fanciful reveries. I never in a million years would propose a prosecution against Bush if I didn't believe that there was more than enough evidence to convict him, and I was standing on very solid legal ground.
All right, Mike?
Vince, this is Mike Barnacle. Let me ask you a question. You spent almost your entire adult life in a courtroom. I've spent a lot of time covering trials in courtrooms. I'm going to give you three names as you're preparing this case: Dick Cheney, Don Rumsfeld, George Tenet. Which one of those three, or all of them, would you offer a grant of immunity to in this proposed prosecution of the president?
Well, we'd have to impanel a grand jury. Almost assuredly, Bush obviously did not do this alone. He conspired certainly with Rice and Cheney. Rumsfeld, I don't know. It depends on what the grand jury testimony would show.
Yeah, but you can get a grand jury. You can get a grand jury to do anything you want it to do. You're a prosecutor. I know you can get a grand jury to do anything you want it. So which of those three?
But I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to base it on the evidence. I'm telling you that Rice and Cheney, almost assuredly, possibly Rumsfeld, possibly Rove. My sense of Colin Powell is that his only sin was weakness.
All right, so let's strip this down, though,
Vincent.
Vincent, let's strip this down. You talk about he took America to war based on a lie. What was that lie?
Right. Okay, I have documentary evidence, and by the way, what I'm about to tell you, to my knowledge, has never appeared in any major newspaper or magazine in America. Why, I don't know. I have documentary evidence right in front of me here that when George Bush told the nation on the evening of October 7, 2002, that Saddam Hussein was an imminent threat to security of this country, he was telling millions of unsuspecting Americans the exact opposite of what his own CIA told him 6 days earlier in a top-secret classified report, and it gets worse. On October the 4th, the Bush administration put out an unclassified summary version of the classified report so they could give this to Congress and the American people. This unclassified version came, wait a while, let me finish. The unclassified version came to be known as the White Paper. And in that White Paper that was shown to Congress and the American people, the conclusion of U.S. intelligence 16 U.S. intelligence agencies that Hussein was not an imminent threat to the security of this country was completely deleted.
Vincent,
completely wiped out.
You've got,
American people did not see that.
Okay, so you've got the director of the CIA, though, who I would call as defense attorney, and I would say, Mr. Tennant, Director Tennant, you were asked what evidence you had that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. You gave your evidence. The president scoffed at you and said, that's it? And then, Mr. Director, you said it is a slam dunk.
You're
Mr.
confusing...
No, I'm not confusing anything. That is what George Tenet told President Bush in the Oval Office.
Yes, but you're confusing weapons of mass destruction with being an imminent threat to the security of this country. Pakistan, China, Russia, they have weapons of mass destruction. Are we going to war with them? The only issue is not whether a nation has weapons of mass destruction, but whether that nation is an imminent threat to the security of this country.
You can't prove beyond... No, you wait a minute. You can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the President of the United States, who makes a decision 1 year later on whether some country is an imminent threat or not, is guilty of murder? How can you prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the president knew Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and that somehow because
he decided... It's not weapons of mass destruction. It's not weapons of mass destruction. It's whether the nation that had weapons of mass destruction is an imminent threat to the security of this country.
That's the president's judgment. That's why we elect presidents.
Wait a while. Oh, I get it. So we're going to take Bush's word over 16 U.S. intelligence agencies. That's very, very smart, Mike.
All right.
Bush knows more than the 16 U.S. intelligence agencies.
Mike.
Let me give you another piece of evidence. Let me give you another piece of evidence from Bush's own mouth, okay? From his own lips that shows he knows he was lying. All right. January 31st, 2003, Bush meets with British Prime Minister Tony Blair in the Oval Office with 6 of their top aides, including Blair's chief foreign policy advisor, David Manning. After the meeting, Manning prepares a 5-page memo stamped extremely sensitive, summarizing what was said at the meeting. And he says that Bush and Blair talked about the doubt that weapons of mass destruction would ever be found in Iraq prior to the invasion. But here's where it gets bad for the guy that you apparently like, Mike. Here's where it gets bad. Not Blair, but George Bush. Manning wrote that George Bush said that he was so upset about the failure of UN inspectors to find weapons of mass destruction that he started talking about 3 possible ways to provoke Hussein into a war. He wanted to provoke a confrontation, one of which ways Bush said, according to Manning, who's taking notes, fly U-2 reconnaissance aircraft over Iraq, falsely painted in United Nations colors, and Bush said, if Hussein fires on them, it's a violation of UN resolutions, and therefore it justifies our going to war. Now let me make this final point here. Bush is telling the American people, telling the world, that Hussein is an imminent threat to the security of this country. But behind closed doors, this very small man whom you supposedly like is talking about how to provoke Hussein into a war. If George Bush honestly believed that Hussein was an imminent threat to the security of this country, the thought of provoking Hussein into a war would never, ever, ever have entered his mind. And I got much more evidence.
Take that, Mike. Well, I will
much more evidence.
I will tell you
this. Have you read the book, Mike?
I will tell you. Yeah, Mike. Have you read the book?
No, I haven't.
No. Well, Mike, you need to read the book before you pass judgment.
But you know that I'm wrong, but you haven't read the book.
Well, there you have it. I believe that, this guy has definitely enough evidence to be able to, prosecute that war criminal.